How many people do you know like that? They've been to church, but they have no idea what it means to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And God sent Philip to remind us today that the gospel doesn't avoid difference, it runs toward it. Well, hey, I want to begin today and ask you to go back in time with me about 100 years ago to Germany and to a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor and a theologian in Germany in the 1930s. And his initial early assignment from God, the thing that God assigned Bonhoeffer to do in Germany in the 1930s, was in the area of academics. God gave him the assignment of teaching and of writing. But for Bonhoeffer, as he looked around and he saw the Nazi Party rise to power, he saw that the church in Germany had become corrupted. And he saw that evil was advancing from his home country in Germany all across Europe. So he realized in that moment that there was a shift coming in his life. And so he stepped out of that role, out of that arena of academics and into a new role. As a pastor, as a Christian, as a Christ follower, he decided to vocally oppose Hitler and the Nazi Party. And this vocal opposition is the thing that led him to being arrested and being imprisoned and ultimately led to his execution. So why does this matter for us today, almost 100 years ago? It matters because we need to understand that for Bonhoeffer, his assignment early on in this area of academics was just for a season. It was not the full picture of what God had planned for his life. Because his calling for Bonhoeffer living in Nazi Germany, he discovered wasn't just to teach truth, but it was to live truth, whatever the cost would be, and it ultimately cost him his life. And once Bonhoeffer embraced that calling and he stepped into that calling, his life took on an eternal weight, so much so that we would be talking about him 100 years later in Florida, and he would to this day be impacting lives around the world. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, his story reminds us that God's calling on our life is not a calling that is focused on our comfort or our position, but it's on faithfulness. God's calling for our life is a calling to be faithful, to follow wherever He may lead. And sometimes we only discover that calling when we're willing to leave an assignment, to step out of a role and step into something new. To step out of a role or a position that we thought defined us and into something new that God had for us. About a year and a half ago, we knew that God had called my family to CrossLife Church into Central Florida. And at that time, my assignment was to serve faithfully here to the best of my ability as the executive pastor. But as I look back over that calling and that part of my journey, I realized that was just part of the journey that God had planned for me, and it wasn't the whole picture that He had in store. Because late last fall, God began nudging my heart. First through the encouragement of people in this room and people in this church. And then through friends and mentors in ministry across the country, but most importantly, through His Spirit. God began to speak and to stir quietly at first and then louder over time to pray about and to consider this opportunity of being the lead pastor at CrossLife Church. So I prayed about it, I considered it, in church I resisted it hard at first. Why? Because I had confused the assignment with the calling. I had confused my assignment for the calling that God had for me, because an assignment is what you do, but a calling is why you do what you do. And so as God was having me walk down this road over these last few months to pursue this opportunity and to consider this opportunity as the lead pastor, He made it known to me, and I began to realize that He wasn't shifting my calling, He was just changing my assignment. That God wasn't pulling me off mission, that he was just simply pulling me deeper into the mission that he had planned for me. And this detour, the one that I did not see coming, the one that I didn't plan, is what led me here today. And we're going to see a similar detour take place in the text today. We're going to be in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 8. We're going to meet a man named Philip. And in Acts chapter 8, God shifts Philip's assignment too, because that, church, is what God does. He redirects people. He redirects those who are willing to go. Those people like Philip who are not tied to an assignment, but who are anchored in a calling. Now, this sermon today is not going to be all about me, because we all feel this tension as well. The reality that we all experience each and every day is that we live in a world that is filled with uncertainty, a world that is filled with confusion, and in a country that is filled with so much division. And we're surrounded, we interact, we work next to, we live next to people each and every day who are craving direction, identity, hope, and ultimately spiritual truth. But here's the reality for us as a church. As a church, we don't have the luxury of just sitting still, sitting by silently, playing it safe. That if we're going to be a spirit-led people, that when God says go, we move. And when we move, we trust that he has prepared the encounter for us on the other side, exactly as Philip is going to experience in our text today. So I want to give you a little bit of a preview of where we're going this morning, of my points, kind of a look behind the curtain of where we're going to be in Acts chapter 8. Here are my 3 things that I hope you see from this text today. The first is this: trust the prompt. Church, God's going to call us to trust the prompt, and often that means going forward without a plan. The second thing we're going to see from this story today is that God's going to call us to break the barrier. That as a church, God's going to call us to cross cultural lines. That God's going to call us to get out of our comfort zone and cross lines outside of our comfort zone, that we have to break the barrier. And the third thing we're going to see from this text is when we have the opportunity to do that, and when we step out in faith, that we get the opportunity to step into someone else's life and speak up. That God, when he opens the door for us, that we as a church, as followers of his son Jesus Christ, are going to speak up when the opportunity is given to us. But a little background on the book of Acts before we get into the text. This book of Acts is kind of the wild beginning of the early church. There's nothing predictable that's happened so far in this book. Everything is new for these early Christians, and God is leading his people into this unknown territory. And we meet this man named Philip. Philip is one of 7 men who were chosen in Acts chapter 6. And now Philip has been preaching in Samaria. So God's assignment for Philip was to go to Samaria and to preach. And God is using Philip in this really, really powerful way in Samaria. The book tells us that there's revival that's broken out. That people are getting saved all over Samaria, that people are being healed physically and then also spiritually. And the church is growing in an incredible way because of Philip's ministry and his faithfulness in Samaria. But God comes to Philip and he says, Philip, I want you to leave all that and go down this desert road. Philip, leave Samaria, leave this ministry and go down this desert road. He doesn't give him a map. He doesn't give him any clear destination or a reason. He just gives him a prompt. Now, we have to ask ourselves this question. If we were in Philip's shoes in this moment, and we were experiencing the fruitfulness of the ministry that he had at this time, there's revival, there's healing, the church is growing, would we be willing to walk away from that fruitfulness and into the unknown? Because everywhere that Philip would go, at this point in his life, a crowd would gather to hear what he had to say and see if they could experience the healing that they had heard about. Would you be willing to leave the crowd for a question mark? In Acts 8, Philip does, and his decision to be obedient to God changes everything. So we're going to be in Acts chapter 8, beginning in verse 26, and the first thing we're going to see from these few verses is to trust the prompt. Acts 28:26 says, Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, Rise and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert place. And he rose and went, and there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning seated in his chariot. And he was reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join this chariot." So an angel of the Lord comes to Philip and tells him to go down this desert road. The Spirit nudges him once again when he gets to that place. And the text tells us that Philip obeys here. There are no details given. There's no destination given. There's no discussion here back and forth between God. There's just trust. And some of you may be like me. I'm a little bit type A. I like to control things. I'm wired that way. And it's really hard for me when God gives me a prompt and calls me to do something. Because often, maybe if you're like me, you can identify with this. I find myself in those moments kind of waiting for God to give the full itinerary before I decide to take a step and move. I'm like, okay, God, I hear the prompt that you're giving me. I hear that kind of nudge by the Spirit, but I need like GPS level clarity in order for me to take a step and follow where you're leading. Anybody else in the room identify with that, or is it just me? Okay, some of us in here. But if you're like me and you identify with that posture of the heart or that mindset, what I've come to realize is that when I have that attitude toward God, when he's prompted me to do something, church, that's not faith. That's control. That's comfort comfort disguised as obedience. Because faith says, I'll follow the prompt even when I don't understand the plan. Faith moves when the Spirit speaks. Faith says yes before it makes sense. The Spirit comes to Philip. He says, rise and go. And what does the text tell us that Philip does? It says he rose and he went. No discussion. He just obeyed. Philip didn't need the plan. He trusted the prompt. What about you? Will you trust the prompt when God calls you to love, to serve, to embrace or engage someone that maybe looks, believes, and acts differently than you do? Will you trust the prompt? Will you go without a plan? In church, for us, what this means is that God may ask us to walk down some unknown roads in the coming days, the coming months, and the coming years. He may ask us to begin some new ministries, to embrace some new strategies, to reach people and develop ways of reaching new people who have never heard the gospel, who live in our backyard here. He may call us to let go of some of our traditions and let go of some of our preferences. But what we need to understand is that God's goal for our life isn't our comfort. God's goal is not our comfort. God's goal is our calling. So we need to ask ourselves, where in my life am I waiting for clarity when God's already given me a calling? Where in my life have I not been obedient and I'm still waiting for God to give me that GPS level clarity where God's already prompted my spirit? You know, I think about this journey that I've walked down this road of this lead pastor opportunity. And after I wrestled and after I worked my way through it, and I decided to take that step of faith and begin the process, and I finally followed the prompt in my own spirit. What was so interesting for me to experience, and I share this with you today because you may have a similar experience in your own life, was once I took that step, guess what? God did not reveal to me how it was going to end. He said, John, all I'm calling you to do is to trust, to obey, and to be faithful. Take one step at a time. Trust and follow. Church, that's the call that God has for all Christians. Just trust and follow, even when we can't see where the path leads. So church, trust the prompt. The second thing we'll see in our text today is to break the barrier. Break the barrier. Verse 30 says, so Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I, unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now the passage of scripture that he was reading was this: like a lamb or like a sheep, he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opens not his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth. And the eunuch said to Philip, "About whom, I ask you, does this prophet say this? About himself or about someone else?" So when the Spirit told Philip to go, I love this part, to go up to this chariot, he doesn't just lazily walk up there. He doesn't say, "God, are you sure this is where you want me to go?" The text says that he ran. He ran to embrace this man that was different in every way than he was. To embrace this unknown situation. Remember, Philip left his place of comfort, working in Samaria. I promise you that he was comfortable there because of the work that God was doing. He could see the faithfulness and the fruitfulness of what God had called him to do. He left his place of control to step into someone else's world. If we're honest, the Western church, too often we adopt this come and see mindset, where we invite the world, or we're waiting on the world to come into our spaces and on our terms. But church, the gospel was never about waiting. The gospel has always been about going. From Genesis to Revelation, God is a sending God. God sent his son Jesus to us, and Jesus sends us to a lost and dying world. Philip didn't invite the Ethiopian to a synagogue. It says he joined him on this desert road, and he joined him in that chariot. And on that road and in that chariot is where the gospel came alive for that man. This makes me think back to the summer of 1997. I was 17 years old, and I spent the entire summer working in Poland and Romania on a mission trip. And as I look back on that time of my life, it's so interesting because I'm 17 years old, and I think back to who I was at that time, and I would share the gospel with every single person that I came in contact with. People halfway across the world, I would patiently use interpreters to share the gospel with people who had never heard the gospel before. I would serve anyone that entire summer in any way so they could experience the love of Jesus Christ. But the interesting thing was, when I got back home, I struggled to share the gospel with my friends at school. And I struggled to share the gospel with my neighbors, people that I saw each and every day. Why? Well, because of fear of rejection, or because of awkwardness, or it felt like it was more risky with people that I knew. But here's the paradox that I discovered, is that I was willing, and church, maybe we're guilty of this as well, to fly across the globe for Jesus, but I'm afraid to walk across the street for him. And when we look at Philip in Acts chapter 8, he didn't wait for a safe moment with this man. He didn't wait for a mission trip. He obeyed. He obeyed the prompt of the Spirit. Church, we need to understand that the mission field isn't just overseas. It's wherever God places us. It's in our workplace. It's in our school. It's in our neighborhood. It's at the gym. Because sometimes God isn't asking us to go far. He's just asking us to go near. And the question for examination in our hearts today, and I ask that you just get real with God in this moment, is this question: is there anyone that you silently decided in your mind or in your heart, anyone that they're too far, that they're too different, or they're too complicated to reach? You've just kind of resolved in your mind and in your heart that person, they're just too far. They're too different. They're too complicated. Their life is too messy to reach. And if the Spirit brings that person or that situation to mind, just confess that to God right now. And go to God and say, "God, forgive me for that wall, that barrier I've created in my heart as it relates to that person. God, tear it down. Let me break the barrier and let me engage that person with love and with truth." Church, God's going to call us to break barriers. And the third thing we see from the text today is he's going to give us an opportunity to step in and speak up. Verse 35 says, "Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with this scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, 'See, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized?' And he commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down into the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more and went on his way rejoicing." Philip didn't wait for someone who looked like him. He ran towards someone who didn't. When Philip came upon this chariot on this ancient desert road, and he saw this man, he didn't see race, he didn't see power, he didn't see a title, he didn't see his background. What he saw was a soul that was searching for truth. And this Ethiopian man, it tells us early in the text that he had been to Jerusalem, that he had been in the temple, but he's still empty. Church, he had been welcomed into religion, but he had been left out of a relationship. How many people do you know like that? They've been to church, but they have no idea what it means to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And God sent Philip to remind us today that the gospel doesn't avoid difference, it runs toward it. The gospel, the good news of the hope and the forgiveness that can be found in Jesus Christ, it doesn't avoid difference. Like Philip, it runs to it. So what does this mean for us as a church? That it means this, that when God cracks open a door for us as a church, as a people, we're not just going to sit back in our spiritual recliners and glance out the blinds. We're going to jump up. We're going to open that door, and we're going to run to engage those people and those opportunities with boldness, with love, and with a sense of urgency. Because, church, we are not called to be spectators. We are called to be gospel participants. And that's what God's calling CrossLife to. Because we are surrounded each and every day by people who are waiting to be seen, people who are waiting to be known, people who are waiting without even realizing it, to be invited into the family of Jesus, into the story that God has prepared for their life. And church, when that moment comes for us, we are not going to miss it. What I want CrossLife to be known for, and when people in our community talk about CrossLife, when other Christians and other churches talk about CrossLife, what I want them to say about us is say, man, CrossLife, they are a church that lives with open eyes, ready hearts, and obedient feet. Man, when God gives them an opportunity to do ministry, they are people whose eyes are open and looking for those opportunities. When he makes it known, they have ready hearts to engage those people and those moments, and they have obedient feet to rush to that opportunity as soon as God makes it known. That is my greatest desire for this church, is that we would be known as being a people like that. And this story is so powerful if we consider this Ethiopian man. Because this Ethiopian in Acts chapter 8, who was completely different than Philip in every way, from a different country, served in the court of a different queen. Because he was a eunuch sexually, he was different than a normal person in that world at the time. In every way imaginable, he was different. But did you know he's the first Gentile convert to Jesus in the New Testament? Like Mary Magdalene, this lady who had a messy past, she was the first person to witness the resurrected Jesus Christ. She was the first evangelist of the good news of the resurrected Messiah. Two unlikely people chosen by God to be first. Because, church, God has always used the unexpected to reach the overlooked. God has always, throughout all of history, used the unexpected to reach the overlooked. In CrossLife, that's going to be us. We may not feel like we're the most qualified church. We may not feel like we're the most resourced church or we're the most impressive church, but God doesn't need polish. He needs obedience. So let's be that kind of church. We may not see the whole path. We may not see where God is leading us, but we know who walks with us, and that is enough. So what now? How does this practically impact your life this week? I want to give you 3 ideas, 3 applications as you leave here today. 3 practical steps that you can take this week. And here's the first one. Say yes before you see the whole picture. Say yes before you see the whole picture. Every morning this week, get up and just pray this simple prayer daily. God, whatever you ask me today, my answer is already yes. Pray that and give that to God. God, whatever you ask me today, my answer is already yes, and see what he does with that. And keep your eyes open for the moment that God gives you an opportunity and he prompts you. And then when he does, the second thing you can do this week is just invite someone into your circle who feels outside of it. Invite someone into your circle who feels outside of it. Just choose one person who you feel maybe like spiritually distant, socially isolated, or culturally different than you. And then invite them into your circle. Intentionally bring them in. Invite them to coffee. Invite them to church. And just sit and listen to them and to their story without judgment. And then as you do that, the last thing is just share one thing Jesus has done for you. Just share one thing. It doesn't have to be a full gospel presentation, just a story. And after they've shared and you've listened, just say to them, hey, can I tell you something that Jesus has done in my life? And when that moment arises, you're going to have an opportunity to plant a seed in their life, and that seed could change everything. You see, Philip didn't plan the desert road. This Ethiopian man didn't expect to meet Jesus on this road. I didn't expect to be standing here today, but this is what happens when you follow God's prompt instead of demanding a plan. For me, the journey hasn't always been clear, as I said, but God's voice has. And here's the biggest thing I've learned in this moment, is I realized that God wasn't calling me to a title, that God wasn't calling me to a role, but that God was calling me to a people, to you, to this moment. But maybe you're sitting here today and you say, well, John, I don't call CrossLife home. I'm here for the very first time. And actually, I don't relate at all to Philip in this story. I relate more to the Ethiopian. If that's you here today and you say, I'm more searching and I'm seeking truth. I've been around religion, but something in my life is still missing. If that's you here today, there's 2 things that you need to know. 2 things that you need to know. Number 1, you're not here by accident. You're not here by accident. God brought you to this moment. And the second thing, and this is the most important thing, if that's you, look at me right now. Jesus is the one you're looking for. If that's you, Jesus is the one you're looking for, who gave his life for you and who conquered sin and death in the grave 3 days later for you. Jesus is the one you're looking for, who can provide the forgiveness that you're seeking, the healing that you've been wanting for so long, the purpose and meaning in life. Jesus is the one you're looking for. So let me ask you this question. What's stopping you this morning from saying yes to Jesus if that's you? Jesus isn't waiting for you to clean up your life, to get everything right. He's ready to meet you right now in the midst of your mess, in the midst of your brokenness. What's keeping you from saying yes to Jesus this morning? This moment, that decision can change everything. Let's pray. Father, I pray that if there are those in the room right now who say, John, yeah, I feel more like the Ethiopian in this story than I do Philip. God, I pray that you would not let them walk out of this building today without that decision resolved. Right now, speak into their life how much you love them. The cost that your son, Jesus Christ, paid on the cross for their salvation. God, remove the lies of the enemy that would tell them that it's not true, or that their life is pointless, or their life is without hope. God, tell them that there is a hope, and there is a point, and there is a purpose, and it's found in your Son, Jesus Christ, and the forgiveness and the relationship and restoration that can happen through him. God, I pray that as a church, that we would be moved, God, that we would be bold in sharing our faith, God, that we'd have eyes that were open to see the needs around us. God, that our hearts would always be ready to act and respond as you make those needs known to us. God, just give us a heart to trust and follow even where we can't see where the path leads. God, we love you. Thank you for being so good. and so generous and so gracious and kind to us. In your name we pray.